a mother-in-law who delights in bullying her daughter-in-law. Right after I announced my pregnancy, she suddenly threw a mug at me. The steam rising from the spilled coffee spoke of its scalding heat. Surprised? The prank was a huge success. She laughed without a shred of remorse, and I felt an anger inside me like never before. If you're gonna play nasty pranks like that, be prepared. My name is Anna. I'm a 29-year-old part-time. I've been married to my husband, Harold, for 4 years, and we haven't been blessed with children yet. We do want them, but such things are gifts, after all. We're starting to think about going to the clinic soon. But for now, I've begun to think about our diet and to make sure we get moderate exercise. The physical aspect is important, but so is the mental. Above all, stress is a big enemy. Though part-time, my job is quite stressful, but considering our finances, quitting isn't an option. Luckily, it's a good place to work with nice people. So, job-related stress is minor and somewhat endearing. But unfortunately, there's something incredibly stressful outside of work. That would be the presence of my mother-in-law. It's common for families to have intense mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflicts. Our home is no exception. The day we decided to get married and went to say hello, my mother-in-law was already a strong character from the first meeting. "So you're the wicked woman who's stealing my son?" I remember how my pasted-on smile froze at that moment. Glaring up at me, she said, "Look here, just because you're gonna marry Harold doesn't mean you can get cocky. Just so you know, I've known my son longer and better than you ever will." In what world does a mother-in-law compete with a daughter-in-law over how long they've known her son? Sure, you've known him longer, you're his mother, after all. This mom loves her son too much. I was completely taken aback. It's probably better than her hating her son, but being overly doting can be tough. It's like she reluctantly gave up on marrying her son because they're blood-related. I was just thinking this when she actually said it, and I was seriously taken aback. Can I really get along with such a mother-in-law? No way. From the start, my mother-in-law didn't want to get along with me, her daughter-in-law. Because she's like this, naturally, her bullying is quite intense. We don't live together, but she lives nearby and frequently comes to our house. Her unannounced visits are annoying, and since she's a housewife, she comes over whenever she likes, regardless of whether it's a weekday or weekend. Of course, I've never received a heads up from her. She comes over even when she knows my husband and I might be out at work, and if we're not there, the complaints pile up on the answering machine. "Why aren't you home?" And that's not all. When we're not home, she involves the neighbors. She waits for another resident to enter and sneaks in with them. I think it's practically criminal, but she insists she's not in the wrong, saying, "It's your fault for not being home." But even if she gets in, we're not there. What's she gonna do once she's at our door? Turns out, she makes a scene. I've been kicked out by the demon wife. The key won't work, she continues to shout, drawing the neighbors out to see what's up. Then she says, "There's a demon wife in this house. Call the police." Can you believe that? When the lady next door told me, "Your mother-in-law was," I nearly fainted. I was so embarrassed I felt like my face was on fire, and when I went around apologizing to the neighbors, I felt like crying. Despite my husband giving her a stern talking to, she hasn't learned her lesson. Just recently, she used the same tactic to reach our condo door and then shouted, "Has anyone seen where my daughter-in-law has gone?" She's a bit neurotic because she can't have a baby. I was keeping an eye on her to make sure she didn't wander off, but where has she gone? I really wish she would stop. No matter how much my husband or father-in-law say, she doesn't stop the harassment. To be honest, it's not just harassment towards me, it affects my husband too, but she doesn't seem to realize it. It's really infuriating to see her smirk when she sees me troubled. She's been asking my husband for a spare key, but thankfully, he's refusing. It's amazing she thinks she'd get one after all this trouble. She probably thinks if she had the key, there wouldn't be any fuss, but I can easily imagine the disaster that would ensue inside our home. In fact, I've already experienced it. In the beginning of our marriage, when I still underestimated my mother-in-law, I gave in to her demand of "I'm your family, after all," and handed over a spare key. Well, that was a big mistake. When I got back from my part-time job, all my belongings were piled up in front of the entrance. Shocked, I went inside and was even more astonished. The walls were plastered with photos of my mother-in-law and my husband as a child, and picture frames were placed around. The groceries I had stocked up were used without my permission, and my pre-made meals were thrown out, replaced by my mother-in-law's cooking in the fridge. Stunned, my mother-in-law proclaimed, I should be the one cooking for my son, as I'm his mother. Furthermore, she declared, I will sleep in the bedroom with my son. You should sleep in the living room. She even said, there's no place for your belongings in this house. It's for my things. Restoring the belongings she had thrown out was a real hassle. I immediately had my husband take back the spare key. But here's the thing. Unbelievably, she had made a copy of the spare key. When I faced the second redecoration, it caught me off guard and I just crumbled. So I immediately added another lock. Seriously, my mother-in-law's obsession with Harold is just too much. It's gotten to the point where her doting is just creepy. Of course, my husband does scold her. Lectured by her beloved son, she pretends to be remorseful, only to repeat the same behavior. She never learns. It wasn't until he threatened to ban her from our home that she finally quieted down a bit. Really, just a bit. At least she stopped involving the neighbors. But the bullying by her continues. At this point, I guess, it's like her hobby. Is bullying her daughter-in-law her reason for living? No joke. There were times I'd come home from work to find a Tupperware full of her homemade food stuffed into the mailbox. Please don't forcefully cram it in and mess up the mail. Sighing, I'd pull it out to find it filled with food I hate. It was the very thing I'd told her I disliked when she once asked, "What don't you like?" Such a detailed form of harassment. And it's food my husband isn't fond of either. On closer inspection, the Tupperware had labels. This one's for the daughter-in-law. This one's for my sonny boy. His container was packed with his favorite dishes. How much free time does she have to make several dishes just to harass someone? She really should find a hobby other than bullying her daughter-in-law. Just the other day, she left some clothes she'd gone out of her way to buy at a department store. They were the complete opposite of my style, or rather, who would wear such bizarre things? Walking around in such flashy designs would definitely draw attention in many ways. My husband made it clear he wouldn't want to be seen walking with me in that. Yet my mother-in-law left it with a note saying, "Send me a picture of you wearing it." That outfit is now just taking up space in my closet. Of course, I've never worn it. If she really bought it at a department store, I'd like to bring a sales clerk over here. I'd like to ask why they decided to sell such clothes. With all this going on, the stress from my mother-in-law's bullying is unbearable. How am I supposed to even think about having kids in this state of mind? I find myself sighing every day. However, life is strange, isn't it? When all you think about is, I want a baby, it doesn't happen, but when your mind shifts to something like, well, it'd be nice to have one, but first I've got to deal with my mother-in-law. That's when it happens. No way! One day, I found myself shaking as I held a pregnancy test in front of me. There it was, a clear positive result. I rushed out of the bathroom and exclaimed, "It's positive." Whoa, you scared me! Have you not been out in a few days? Thanks for the cliché misunderstanding. But no, it's a positive pregnancy test. Ignoring my husband's typical comment, I thrust the pregnancy test towards him. Huh? Positive? Yes, positive. What? I'm serious. Positive, are we having a baby? Yes. My husband must have been worrying more and more that it wouldn't happen. It took him a moment to grasp what I was saying. Then it finally sunk in. Really? Really? Yes. Thank you, Anna. We did it. We both cried and hugged each other. After we celebrated for a while, we realized that pregnancy is really just the beginning. The early stages require that I shouldn't overexert myself. So, I cut back on my part-time job. As a result, our income decreased, but it's a necessary expense from our savings. I'll work harder, my husband declared, fired up. It's really appreciated. I'll do the shopping and carry the bags. Anna, you don't need to lift anything heavier than a fork. I'll cook too, he announced. It's nice, but a bit over the top. Just so you know, the clothes I'm wearing are already heavier than a fork. After I told him his care was becoming a bit much, he shifted to doing things that I specifically asked for. Thankfully, we successfully confirmed the pregnancy sac and the heartbeat. Hooray! We were overjoyed. As we looked at the photo of the pregnancy sac from the hospital, my husband and I started to discuss what comes next. Yes, here's where the trouble begins. It was like, how do we announce the pregnancy to our parents? My family already has a grandchild from my brother, so it won't be a grandchild fever there. So, we decided to just tell them normally. The problem is on my husband's side. It's always his side, or rather, the problem is my mother-in-law. Normally with a normal mother-in-law, you would just tell her, but his mother is not normal. Still, we can't not tell her, right? Right, we agreed. Both agreed, albeit reluctantly. If it were just my mother-in-law, we might consider keeping it quiet, but my father-in-law is there too. It would be unfair to him not to tell as it's their first grandchild. So, we decided, albeit reluctantly, to go to my husband's parents' house to announce the pregnancy. We thought about just calling to announce our pregnancy like I did with my family, but since we live close and to avoid any fuss later, we decided to visit his parents' house over the weekend. Right as we opened the front door, my mother-in-law exclaimed, "Oh, Harold. What a surprise, come in," and she pulled him inside. Of course, I was left alone, standing at the entrance. As I hesitated about whether it was okay to just walk in, Harold quickly came back and said, "Sorry, Anna, my mom's grip is like a wrestler's." I couldn't resist. "Come in." Following him, my father-in-law came out and greeted me with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry you always have to deal with this, Anna. She's really good at sneaking around me." It seems he is quite overwhelmed by her too. As Harold and I sat on a two-seater sofa in the living room, my mother-in-law wedged herself between us. "Hey, this sofa is for two people. It's painful, don't push." I had to stand up quickly, and Harold angrily said, "What are you doing, Mom?" Then she replied unabashedly, "Well, it's been so long since my son came home. I want to sit next to you." "Come on, Mom." "Hey, Mirabelle." Before Harold could say anything, my father-in-law spoke up in a stern voice. "But move over." "Okay." He didn't yell, but his presence was commanding enough that even my mother-in-law reluctantly moved. They sat across from us. And finally, Harold said, "We're having a baby," which was the real reason for our visit today. "Congratulations!" Hearing this, my father-in-law's eyes widened before he smiled happily and offered his congratulations. He's usually so expressionless and quiet, so seeing him genuinely happy made me feel happy too. I wonder about my mother-in-law, though. She might end up ecstatically claiming, "I'll raise my grandchild." Harold seemed to think so too. We both braced for her reaction. But contrary to our expectations, she kept her head down and didn't move. I thought she'd lift her head with a sparkling face saying, "I'll take care of my grandchild." This was an unexpected reaction, and as we watched, she slowly raised her head. "What?" Tears were streaming down her face. But it was clear these weren't tears of joy. Because she was glaring at me with a fierce expression. "I won't forgive this." "What?" What did my mother-in-law just say? As I tilted my head in confusion, she shouted louder, "I won't forgive this." "She's pregnant? Harold's child? This woman? She took my son from me, and now a baby too. I won't forgive this, never. Harold is mine, and if he has a child, it just means more enemies for me. I've been trying to get her out of the house. Why won't she leave? Why won't she divorce Harold? Why a child? Mirabelle. While glaring at me with a resentful face, my mother-in-law's mouth moved frantically. If my father-in-law hadn't stopped her, she surely would have continued. Startled by her name being called, she snapped out of it. But until then, I was truly frightened by the demonic look she had given me. It was the first time I felt genuine fear towards her, as if she were possessed by something. "Oh, I'm sorry," she apologized hastily. But despite her apology now, my fear didn't subside. I was thinking about how I just wanted to leave when she said, "I'll go make some coffee," and headed to the kitchen. After she left, my father-in-law deeply bowed and said, "I'm truly sorry, both of you. Dad, Mom's behavior, it's seriously not right." "Yes, I think so too. Childcare was her life, after all. I'm also to blame. I wanted her to be a housewife, but that effectively trapped her in a small world," my father-in-law said sadly. What should have been a joyous announcement had somehow turned the atmosphere sour. "Just going to head home now," my husband said as my mother-in-law returned with the coffee. "Oh, I've prepared some nice coffee. At least have some before you leave." My husband looked at me troubled. "It's just coffee," I said, and he apologized with a sorry look. Honestly, my straightforward feeling was anger. Why do we have to feel so unpleasant about something that should be joyous? It's all her fault, isn't it? Thinking about it made me genuinely upset. This definitely wasn't morning sickness. However, contrary to my anger, my mother-in-law now sported a calm, smiling face, as if her earlier behavior was a lie. "I'm really sorry, Anna. I said some strange things out of shock." It was my father-in-law who responded to that. "Exactly. What are you thinking?" "Right, I'm sorry. Come to think of it, an apology from my mother-in-law might be a first. She tends to be overbearing, but with her husband by her side, she might actually behave more normally." With that thought, I glanced at her hands. The steam rising heavily spoke of coffee's heat. "That's right, you're married, and it's perfectly normal to be blessed with a child." "That's right, Mom. I need to behave properly too." "That's right, Mirabelle. I'm gonna be a grandfather, and you're gonna be a grandmother." She smiled serenely, as if a spell had been lifted from her. Relieved, my husband and father-in-law began to talk. This might be the first time we've had such a peaceful moment with my mother-in-law around. Could it be possible that from now on, things will be calm? Maybe her outbursts are a thing of the past. I thought so. "Be careful, it's hot." She handed a mug to her husband. "Don't burn yourself." She passed one to my husband. I was absent-mindedly watching her hands. It was just then. "Here, Anna, take this too. Make sure you catch it." It was the moment I responded with a puzzled "huh" to her words. I saw her face, joyously brandishing a mug at me. Then, the mug came flying towards me. It was filled with scalding hot coffee. "What? Anna, watch out!" Frozen by the sudden event, I couldn't move. I could hear my husband's voice. And suddenly my view was obscured by his back. A splashing sound followed by the noise of the mug hitting the floor and breaking. Even as I heard this, I was still unable to move. I snapped back to reality when I heard my husband's voice saying, "Ouch," near my ear. "Honey, so hot. Are you all right?" "Yeah, I'm okay. I managed to shield it with my clothes, so it didn't hit me directly." "But still." I glanced at the floor where steam was still rising from the spilled coffee. The thought of how hot the coffee was and what could have happened if it had hit my face directly sent shivers down my spine. "What did you do?" I shouted, looking at her with accusatory eyes, but she seemed just as stunned by the unexpected incident. "Mirabelle." My father-in-law approached her, his face red with anger. At that moment, as if waking up from a trance, my mother-in-law exclaimed, "Oh my God," and rushed to the fridge to grab some ice. "No need, just cool it with water." My husband mentioned that it was only over his clothes, but he must have still felt the heat. He rolled up his sleeve and went to the sink to run cold water over his arm. As I heard the sound of water running and my husband cooling his arm, I glared fiercely at my mother-in-law. "What were you thinking?" What do you mean? My hand just slipped a bit." "You were aiming right at my face, weren't you?" "What if it had hit me?" "It's fine since nothing happened." "That's not okay. My husband could have been burned." "It's your fault for not catching it properly." "What?" I was stunned by her response. She initially seemed remorseful, but then she became defiant. "What? It was just a little prank, wasn't it? Making such a big fuss over something so small is crazy." "A prank?" I was dumbfounded and lost for words. To my astonishment, she smirked and said, "Didn't I tell you, it just slipped." "Ahaha, gotcha, did I scare you?" "The prank was a huge success." She even laughed. It really felt like everything went dark before my eyes, a saying that I realized was true in moments like this. My vision wasn't just obscured, it was overwhelmed by rage, a fiery red that seemed to blaze before me. How could someone go this far over mother-in-law antics? And to laugh about it, claiming it was a slip of the hand or a mere accident, even when her own son could have been severely burned. Unbelievable. "Mirabelle, what are you doing? What's the big deal?" I was just trying to lighten the mood because everyone seemed so tense. It was just a little prank. If Harold hadn't stepped in, it would have missed and hit the floor. "She's pregnant, for heaven's sake." So what? Why is she acting all high and mighty just because she's pregnant? Faced with her words, I realized that talking to her was pointless, and I walked away from the scene. When I went to check on my husband, he seemed to have avoided a burn, adjusting his sleeve. But he was gripping his phone, seemingly making a call. "Are you okay?" I worried he might have called an ambulance because he was seriously injured. As I approached, filled with anxiety, he smiled reassuringly to signal that he was okay. "No, sorry, but I need it urgently." My husband said so before hanging up the phone. "Did you call an ambulance?" "No, I'm fine, really." "Not an ambulance, but I called someone else." "Someone else?" In front of me, my husband smiled reassuringly as if to say everything was okay. And behind, my in-laws were arguing fiercely, much like a couple in the midst of a heated marital spat. "I can't take this anymore." "What the hell are you thinking?" "What are you thinking?" "That woman is a demon wife who stole our son." "Demon wife?" "That's you. Or rather, a demon mother in your case. Either way, what you did is unforgivable. What she did is even more unforgivable." Oh, what a mess. I was unsure of what to do next, but I certainly had no intention of siding with my mother-in-law. Despite everything turning out okay this time, it was a dangerous situation not just for my husband but for me as well. As I gently placed my hand on my stomach, my husband peered at me worriedly and asked, "Are you okay?" I responded with a reassuring smile to let him know that I was fine. However, continuing any interaction with my mother-in-law might be too risky, given the stress it could cause, both mentally and physically. It might be best to cut ties until the baby is born. It was just then that I thought about this. The doorbell rang. We couldn't tell who was at the door. Seizing the moment to escape my father-in-law's imposing presence, my mother-in-law quickly declared, "Oh, someone's here," and scurried off. She ignored his protest. "Hey, we're not done talking." "Hello, who is it?" she asked, and the sound of the door opening followed. Immediately after, a surprised cry from her echoed, "What?" Wondering what was happening, my husband suggested, "Let's go see," and I decided to follow him. Together with my husband and father-in-law, I approached the entrance, and we all expressed our surprise. "What? Police? Why?" To my surprise, I saw a stern-faced police officer standing at the door. Nervously, my mother-in-law stammered, "May I help you?" The officer replied, "We received a report." "May we speak with you?" "A report?" Her face turned pale. She seemed utterly shocked as the officer continued, "We have a report of an assault." "Is that true?" Her face turned white as a ghost. "What are you talking about? Admit your guilt, Mom." "I haven't done anything." "Well, we can use my burn as evidence then." "What?" Astonished, she stared at my husband. He extended his arm, where the coffee had splashed, displaying it in front of her. I was momentarily worried, remembering his earlier assurance that he was fine. Was he lying? But looking at his determined profile, I understood. I see. This is an act. Indeed, as his wife, I could discern when he was pretending. Perhaps due to her panic, my mother-in-law couldn't see through the act. Especially with the police officer right there, who could blame her for not staying calm? The officer narrowed his eyes with my husband's words. "A burn? How did that happen?" My mother threw a mug of boiling coffee at me. At that moment, she cried out, "No, that's a lie." "It's not a lie. The broken mug is still scattered in the living room." "Looks like this is a case for arrest then. So, I'm arresting you." With that, the police officer surprisingly pulled out handcuffs. Is an arrest that simple? I wasn't the only one shocked. My mother-in-law looked even more astonished and confronted my husband with a demonic expression. "Harold! You're betraying your own mother. After all I've done for you. You're a curse on your parents." My mother-in-law, driven insane by the belief that her beloved son had betrayed her. But he retorted, "You were the first one to betray, Mom." She fell silent, unable to argue. "Why can't you be happy that I've found a woman I love more than anyone else? Why can't you be happy we're having a child? Why do you insist I become a man who would silently watch his beloved wife get hurt?" She couldn't respond to her son's words. "I cared about you, Mom. I hated the harassment towards Anna and wanted it to stop. I've even been tough on you before, believing it all stemmed from your love for me, but I can't forgive you anymore. Harold, if you're gonna hurt my family, my wife and baby, then I'm cutting ties with you." "What?" My mother-in-law, who had already gone pale, turned even whiter upon hearing her son's declaration to cut ties. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, and her lips trembled uncontrollably. "You're joking, Harold, right? Cutting ties, you can't be serious." "It's no joke. I'll never see you again, and neither will your grandchild." "That's too much." "Who's really being too much here? You should be happy. You won't have to see the daughter-in-law you hate or the grandchild you tried to harm. You won't have to see a son who values his family." "No, I can't stand that. Not that." She cried out and broke down in tears, but his decision was firm. Looking down coldly, his eyes showed no trace of filial affection. She slowly retreated further into the house. "Wait, what about the arrest?" Turning back, I saw the officer was shaking hands firmly with my husband. "Thanks, Kevin. Sorry for the trouble." "Don't mention it. Just treat me to a drink next time." "Of course." "See you around then." After that conversation with my husband, the police officer, Kevin, left. "What?" Stunned, I looked at my husband, who returned my gaze with a mischievous, impish grin. He's actually an old classmate from junior high school named Kevin. Mom never knew who I hung out with back then. "Kevin is a cop?" "No, he's just a regular office worker who's into cosplay." "Cosplay?" "Cosplay, that's where people dress up as characters from comics, right?" I knew he had a police cosplay set because he'd shown me a picture before. Once you take a good look, you can tell it's nothing like a real police officer's uniform, though. Now that he mentioned it, I remembered. He was wearing a jacket to obscure it, but the color and design were different from a real police uniform I'm familiar with. He's still single and lives at his parents' home, so I thought he might be available. I just asked him if he could help out, and he came right over. It's good to have friends you can count on. With that, my husband laughed heartily as if he had successfully pulled off a prank. Mom said it was just a prank, so this was a prank back, a huge success. I wasn't sure if she could hear us from the back room where she hadn't emerged. More than the truth about the fake cop, the sincere declaration to cut ties from her son had deeply affected her. After that, I never met her again. Well, technically, she's my ex-mother-in-law now. Even my father-in-law reached his limit with her overbearing behavior and they divorced. She got some of the property, so she started living alone, but she was in a daze, having lost her son, her purpose in life. My husband frequently receives voicemails like, "Please forgive me. I beg you, forgive me." But he finds them creepy and has blocked her number. He's serious about never seeing her again. Though he acknowledges the debt of being raised by her, whether he will never meet her again in his life is uncertain. What's clear is that she will likely never meet me or our child. Recently, her house has become known as a hoarding house, but that's none of my business. I think to myself, she might as well be buried under it. Maybe I am a bit of a demon wife. Months later, a beautiful baby was born to us. Our baby is the apple of my eye. However, I still can't understand an obsession like my former mother-in-law's. Raising a child is tough but okay. I have a husband who loves and protects his family. No matter what problems may arise in the future, we'll be okay. Surely, we can be a happy family, always smiling.